Okay. Good day, folks. My name is Matthew Brown, and here at Finding the Warmth of Our Sun at Madison 365. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. Please hit subscribe and like and all that fun jazz. Hope all of y'all doing all right, staying safe, and practice a safe Thanksgiving, at least hopefully. Today, going to be covering interesting topic, but mainly the call or the whole thing is, well, defund the military. Well, basically, the American empire has to end. If we are going to be able to move forward as a nation, we have to end the American empire, particularly the war on terror. Pardon the soon-to-be see it pun, but the cost of war has been absolutely too much. Beyond even just the moral aspects of this, the strict, just cut and dry, not wading into the hardcore ethics of it, and the human cost. It's been bad public policy in a lot of real ways. But what is the cost of war? According to Brown University's Cost of War, at least 800,000 people have died due to direct violence, including armed forces on all sides of the conflict. This is within the context of the war on terror, which the United States has launched, between contractors, civilians, journalists, and humanitarian workers, and armed forces, and so on and so forth. Many more people have probably died of indirect causes of these wars, from malnutrition, environmental issues, famine, and other health issues that come up from war, such as our depleted uranium shells, which create all sorts of health conditions and seep into the soil, even though they're great at blowing up tanks. We know that over 335,000 civilians have been killed in direct violence by all parties in these conflicts. 335,000 civilians. And over 7,000 U.S. soldiers have died in these wars. That's death. But that's not even accounting for how many have been traumatized for life or have been disabled through being wounded. There's a real human cost to this, and that's, again, not taking into account non-U.S. folks that are hurt and disabled and experiencing trauma that cycles through within a lot of these destabilized nations that we destabilized and are getting really minimal help outside of, if they're getting help, what it is it's in military aid, not in human aid. These costs will continue over decades, even after they end. Even with the financial costs with just our U.S. veteran care, which apparently won't peak until mid-century. Funding reconstruction efforts that are quite corrupt and have spent over, roughly around $200 billion. The cost of Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Syria wars have totaled $6.4 trillion. The stimulus in 2008 wasn't even $1 trillion. We are spending trillions on destruction and war and not investing in human and humanity. Known military spending is 15% of all federal spending. And there's a large amount of black funds that we don't know how much money is being put in and what it's being spent on as well. Overall, the U.S. military budget that we know of stands at $736 billion. Means the Pentagon is spending as much money on defense as the next 10 countries combined. We're not as high per capita as other nations, but we're spending a massive amount in total. We are also spending $115 billion on policing a year, as these things intersect, as a lot of our military surplus goes into our police forces and are part of the police spending, particularly in upkeep of this equipment. But we spend more on police than any other country's military budget, save for China's. These things are absolutely interconnected, and particularly how the police view themselves as quasi soldiers and military geared up. The war has come home. This war has absolutely come home. This is an absolutely out of control budget that is plagued by institutional racism and systemic racism and just general practice of race. Like our wars are against Black and brown nations. And we can't forget the history that that did lead us here. Saddam Hussein was in power because of the United States. Iran, with our coup of their democratic elected government in the 50s to put in place the horrendous Shah, effectively radicalized a lot of people and created the conditions for the Iran hostage crisis and the installment of the current Iranian government, pretty much, and radicalize our military bases in and around the Middle East, radicalize Osama bin Laden and use our very own training against us as he built Al-Qaeda. But it was in direct response to not wanting the U.S. imperial presence. Well, he used religious radicalism to recruit people to use terror. And terror was very much a tactic he adopted because he saw direct conflict with the United States as ineffective, and felt that if he could draw the United States into long unarmed combat in an effectively unwinnable situation, because this isn't anything that you can really defeat outside of changing how you interact with the world, that you'd see the downfall of the United States. And while here we are, over 15 years later, after September 11th, still engaged in military conflicts around the globe. We have over 200,000 U.S. troops stationed overseas in more than 150 countries. There are 193 countries in this world. We have over 800 U.S. military bases in 80 countries. The other 11 countries in the world that also have bases in foreign countries have 70 bases between them. That's from an article that The Intercept did. In the book, The Violent American Century, between 1948 and 1990, the U.S. government secured the overthrow of at least 24 Latin American governments and trained brutal death squads in the process. Since about mid-20th century, the U.S. has engaged or taken part in over 80 coups across the globe. And let's be clear, most of these coup attempts were within democratically elected governments. These weren't brutal dictators that we are somehow freeing people. These are governments that we labeled as socialist because they didn't succumb to American will or American interest. And what we say is American interest is essentially U.S. corporate interests, U.S. corporations. And I mean, these things are intrinsically tied to capitalism and the spread of capitalism. The United States as a state, its foreign policy operates in the interests of capital. Or places like China, capital operates in the interests of the state, which impacts foreign policy in real ways. So if a nation is unwilling to engage economically in the way that the United States says so, there are real threats, military and intelligence-wise and stability-wise, against those nations. And we've seen that. Libya recently, under that, when Gaddafi was overthrown in basically CIA-backed overthrow. At that point, at some points he was backed by the United States, and other points not. This particular attempt came at an interesting time, and somebody that the United States has really felt at that point they could no longer control to, keep within their pocket. He was attempting to organize African states to break free from Western economic control through organizations like the World Bank. Organizations like the World Bank control nations within Africa through debt and lending practices that effectively beholden these nations. And yes, a lot of money goes into Africa, but more money is extracted out of Africa. Part of it through these practices of through organizations like the World Bank. Then money is like put in through charity. Basically, we're robbing them and giving charity, a very similar way that our philanthropists in the United States, our billionaires, operate. In this, let's extract as much as we can and then facilitate philanthropy to show how much we care and give away while maintaining a system that effectively extracts resources from our own country. Now, we do the same thing within our own foreign policy. So we're extracting resources from Africa, the Middle East, particularly within oil, and maintaining this through a brutal military presence. The Georgetown Public Policy Review, and let's be real, this is a absolutely brutal American presence that is effectively state-sponsored terror. I saw a speaker from Pakistan talk about how, this is a few years ago, how children in Pakistan don't go outside to play when it's sunny outside because of US drone strikes. More drone strikes happen when it's sunny. So it's safer to be inside when it's sunny in certain areas of Pakistan. The Georgetown Public Policy Review found drone strikes create more people we label as terrorists than we kill. It creates anti-American sentiment and helps recruit people that are anti-American. In ways not unjustly. We're occupying and bombing their country. How would we feel if China placed military bases in and around the United States without much say at all from us? And at any moment, a bomb could fall from the sky near us because there is somebody they labeled a terrorist that was effectively fighting against the occupation of the United States by Chinese military forces. And there's nothing that we could do about it. Nothing. No recourse that we could go through at the UN. We can't really strike back. A lot of the infrastructure that the Department of Homeland Security used to cage kids was part of the war on terror. Aspects of the war on terror and legislation passed, just the War Powers Authorization Act and stuff passed through the Patriot Act, have made it easier to spy on Americans, have made it easier to kill Americans and label Americans terrorists, have eroded our civil liberties, has made our military, made our police far more militarized, has taken and led to, much more executive power and made it far easier for Trump to potentially be successful in a coup than what he was. The Department of Homeland Security needs to be disbanded. The war on terror needs to end, and we need to start closing down our military bases across the United States. These billions and trillions over the years should be invested in projects of humanity and not destruction, should be invested in our crumbling infrastructure in schools and education systems and healthcare system, and not the destruction of a nation across the globe that can't even touch us. These things are interlinked in very real ways, and pulling back these military bases won't hurt our national security. In fact, it probably helps us insofar that it creates less anti-American sentiment. Most of our military interventions aren't or don't spread democracy, but spread death, chaos, and destruction. and refugees and people that lose their homes. There are smarter ways to engage a world and would-be despots. But most of the time, we support them in some way, shape, or form, or have, until we decide they're no longer useful. This is part of how we heal as a nation, is by turning away from perpetual violence. Our government officials love to tell Black Lives Matter protesters, as some are potentially or allegedly burning down a Target, destruction and violence isn't the way. Well, we learned it from you. I mean, it's a bad line. I mean, it comes from a different place, but the hypocrisy is quite deep, as the United States uses violence as its main way to enforce its will and wants across the globe, be it through police domestically or the military abroad. It is our greatest export. We are the biggest arms dealer in the world and the greatest exporter of violence in the world. That is what the United States is, and its foreign policy legacy. Something we need to grapple with, and it's how we heal, is by grappling with the death and destruction that we've brought across the globe. So defund the police and defund the military. And within that, it doesn't mean that we are isolationists or can't have the capability to defend or protect ourselves within military capabilities. But it means that we are no longer practicing things like the Carter Doctrine, which declared oil, or declared basically the right of the United States to secure oil any place in the world it wants to, regardless of the sovereignty of the nation that is in it, for our national interests and national security. Now, it came under President Carter, who paved the way for much of this. Wasn't the only one, but this isn't a Democratic or Republican issue. It's a U.S. issue. So as you struggle with fights for, or struggle within yourself as far as defund the police, think about the connection with the military and expansive it is. Call your senator, call your congressperson, and raise the call in however, or really in whatever ways that you're active, to defund the military. It's one of the things we have to do to save ourselves from ourselves. But with that said, thanks for coming this week to Finding Warmth Under the Sun. I'm Matthew Brown, your host here at Madison 365. Hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or YouTube. Thanks for coming. It's still quite deadly out there, of course, so mask up, particularly as this winter starts to really get going. But thanks for coming, and hope you all have a good week. Thank you.
This is 365 Media.